Science! Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Free Read Fridays, I think it is. I'm your intrepid narrator, host Fragath, and today we will be reading through more of The Ascension Factor by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. Well, Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert, whatever. It's both of them. Frank Herbert is dead at this point, by the time the book is published, as far as I know, and Bill Ransom, I believe, did most of the writing. Not that it matters all that much. So previously on, we see the grim reality that is life on Pandora under the tyranny, I should say, of the Director, one Raja Flattery, who incidentally is not the original Flattery. I thought it was. I was wrong. I think he thinks of himself as the original Flattery, but he's actually a clone. It's something like that. Anyway, it's a Raja Lawn. It's a Raja Flattery. I don't know if it is for sure. I do not know for sure if it is a Raja Lawn Flattery. That sort of distinction should not matter. That's kind of the point of the series, actually. You may have noticed. Is discrimination bad? Kind of the point. Anyway, last time, other than seeing him be what life under his tyrannical reign looks like, we also had Ben Ozette and Crista Gali on the move. She is able to pick up his memories through skin contact. She's not sure if he can pick up her memories through skin contact. I don't think he can yet. And let's see, Beatriz Tatouche is not quite on her way into orbit, I don't think, at the end of last week. Suffice it to say, that is the direction she is headed. Because she's very interested in this, what is the project called? Anyway, it's Flattery's project to build another ship and basically abandon Pandora and just dip. Because he doesn't like it very much. That's kind of it. I think if she does get up this week, we get to meet a new character who's going to be a recurring character. Anyway, I think we have a couple chapters from his perspective, but we haven't gotten to him yet. That's not spoilers. Well, okay, maybe it is, but it's not spoilers. I didn't tell you who they be. Anyway. We also get our first introduction to Spider Nevi, who is he's a fixer for Director Flattery. A fixer in the sense that he kills, maims, and tortures whoever Flattery says should be killed, maimed, or tortured. He does other things too, but Raja Flattery is kind of using him as a sounding board, telling him about all his little Machiavellian maneuverings that he's doing and how he's holding on to power, how he's taking power. Basically, he's opening his mouth and letting the whole plan spill out, and that might not be the best idea with a guy who is valued because he's a remorseless psychopath. As the book says, Spider Nevi is perfectly content to remain with the Director because the Director enables his passions, which are unpleasant for the rest of us. Anyway, with that, let's get rocking and a-rolling. I will probably have to cut this abruptly short at a relatively short notice. Life intervenes. I will get rolling then. To think of a power means not only to use it, but above all, to abuse it. Gaston Bachelard, The Psychoanalysis of Fire. The two old vendors hunched in a hatchway, protecting themselves and their wares from the jostlings of a mob that muscled its way toward the preserve. One munched a smashed cake, the other nursed a bleeding nose against his sleeve.
Animals!
Torvin spat, and a fine spray of blood came with it.
Is there anyone left who is not an animal? Except you, my friend. You are a human being.
His free hand patted the other's shoulder and found a large rip in the fabric of the older man's coat.
Oh, David, your coat!
David brushed crumbs from his chin and pulled the shoulder of his coat across his chest, closer to his good eye.
It will mend, he said, and the mob is passing. If there are dead, my friend, we should get their cards for the poor.
I'm not going out there. Torvin's voice was muffled by his sleeve, but David knew he was firm on that point. It was just as well. His eyes were bad, and his feet not quite quick enough to outrun security. It was a shame when the security got the cards. They sold them, or traded them. Every day, Torvin and David risked their lives to give a bit of stale cake or a rind of dried fruit to a hungry one without a card. David shook his head.
What foolishness.
He worked beside Torvin. They were friends, yet he could not trade him a cake for a dried fruit. He had to have a marker on his card for the fruit, and Torvin would have to punch it out, and then he could have it. If Torvin didn't have a pastry marker on his card, David could not give him a cake. For Torvin to possess a cake without a proper punched card would mean losing his next turn in the line. Under the best of conditions, he would not have expected a turn for at least a week. Under the worst conditions, he could starve with a fistful of coupons.
This is craziness, he told Torvin. It is well I am old and ready to die, because the world makes no sense to me. Our children run about killing each other. It is permissible to have food on one table, but not another. We have a leader who takes food from the mouths of babies so he can travel to the stars. Good riddance, I say. But what will he leave behind? His bullies, who are also our children. Torvin, explain this to me. Bah!
Torvin's faded blue sleeve was crusted with blood, but the bleeding on his nose had stopped. David could tell by the way he said bah that the nose was stopped up. He remembered that time the security slapped him, the fragrant burst of blood in his nose.
Thinking we'll get you into trouble, he heard Torvin warning him. We are better off to keep quiet, dry our allowance of fruit, bake our allowance of cakes, and be thankful that our families have something to eat. Be thankful?
David wheezed one of his silent laughs.
You are no youngster, Torvin. Who taught you to be thankful to eat when someone across the wall has nothing? There is no greater sin, my friend, than to eat a full meal when your neighbor has none. We give cards to the poor. Grave robbers, David hissed. That's what they've made us. Grave robbers who could be shot for throwing scraps to the hungry. This is craziness, Torvin. Such craziness that this mob is making sense to me. Burn it all and start over. They are hungry now. Those animals who beat me, they are not hungry. They have cards. They work down under, and we see them here daily. Where do they get off chanting, "We're hungry now," when, listen, Torvin, to me, an old man now gone crazy. Listen, Torvin, to me, an old man now gone crazy. Listen, we are old, you and I. You, not so old. Would you have given them something if you could?
Torvin stuck his head out the hatchway, looked up and down the street, then hunched back inside.
Of course, you know me. I'm not a greedy man. I've done such a thing. Well, listen to me, old man. The mob we saw, yes, they have cards. Yes, they bring a little food home for a family of 4. If there are 6, 8, 10, then the card still only feeds a family of 4.
No one argues with that, Torvin said. We can't breed ourselves out of...
When you or I get too old and have to live with our children, ship forbid, that will be one more on a card of 4. Take in a refugee who has no card, my friend. Yes, that makes it 6 on a card of 4, and the average of people who have cards is 8. The ones without cards, the stinking ones who are dying at the settlement's edge, begging for food, begging for work, sleeping in the mud, they cannot run through the streets themselves to shout, "We're hungry now," because they can barely stand. We give crumbs from our guilt, from our shame. This mob gives their bodies, their voices to the hungry. They give whatever they have. David leaned heavily on his folded table and got to his feet. The mob had moved on quickly. Had his body allowed, he might have followed them. He watched Torvin test his nose gingerly with his fingertips.
I'm afraid, David, of people like that. They might have killed us. It could have happened.
Torvin sounded as if he had corks in his nose. David shrugged. They are afraid, too, because only the card gives them a place in the line, and then only when their turns come around. Without a card, how long before you or I wake up in the mud down coast? How many nights, Torvin, could you sleep in the mud and still wake in the morning? Torvin tested the bridge of his nose again, wincing.
I don't like this, David. I don't like getting beat up.
Such drama, David said. The man was pushed in here. You were hiding under your table and the corner hit your nose. That is not a beating. The poet over there, now that man took a beating. David's nod indicated a dark shape pacing the hatchway across from them. The street was nearly clear, only a few stragglers scurried about, dodging the stun sticks of security. The line to the warehouse was reforming already as the bravest or the hungriest came out of hiding. Only one adult and one child of a card could wait in line, so the chore usually fell to the strongest unemployed member. Whoever did the shopping might have to carry out a 2-week supply of foodstuffs for 8 people or more. Security protection was good in the line, but spotty elsewhere, so there were actually 2 lines, one on one side of the street going in and one on the other going out. Licensed vendors like David and Torvin worked the line, selling to those who were afraid they wouldn't get inside today, or who wanted a little something different to take home to the Watts. The man they called the poet across the way worked his way up and down the line each day, babbling of ship and the return of ship. He was careful not to speak against Flattery's void ship project. He had done that once and come back a broken man. The poet had not stood upright since, but walked in a shuffle, bent nearly double at the waist. David could hear him now, shouting after the tail end of the mob. I have been to the mountain top. Let freedom ring.
That one,
Torvin snorted, and his nose started bleeding again.
That one has been to the spore dust once too often.
David smiled at his friend. He and Torvin were nearly the same age, in their 60s, but he hadn't known Torvin long. There was much he had never told him. I was taken once, David whispered. A security wanted cakes without a marker, and I wouldn't give them to him. I knew if I did, he would be back every day. He bullied me. I would rather give them to the poor, so I did a foolish thing. I threw them into the line, and there was a scramble. Well, I knew I would be arrested, but I forgot about the others. They rounded up everyone who had a cake without a punch on the card and took them in. Torvin's face paled.
My friend, I didn't know. What did they do to you?
They took me to a shed that had cubicles in it, separated by curtains. In each one they were doing something to someone. The screams were terrible, and the smell. David took a deep breath and let it out slow. The poet was still gesturing and railing from his hatchway. He was there, in the cubicle next to me. He was an important man from down under who was the director of all of Holovision. Flattery had taken over. I didn't know that. And this man had commented on the air that Flattery wanted to brainwash the world.
A brave man,
Torvin said. He appraised the poet in a new light. A fool, David said. He would have been better off to find a way to fight inside, or hidden out to do something like those shadow box people are doing. He must have known what would happen. David dusted off his threadbare trousers, put on his cap, and leaned against the hatchway, his gaze very distant and his voice low. Well, I'll tell you what happened to him. They put him in a metal barrel, bent over double, and tied a block of concrete to his testicles. There was no floor in the barrel, so he could move it around by shuffling, but he had to keep bent over, and his knees bent down, to keep the weight off his testicles. His hands were tied behind his back, and throughout the day they would beat the sides of the barrel with those sticks they carry. They seldom fed him, but when they did, he had to take food and water from the floor, bent over like that, an animal inside the barrel. He was a learned man. I never heard him curse. He only prayed. He prayed to every god I've heard of, and many that I don't know. They made him crazy to discredit him. Who would believe a madman? Particularly a madman who eats bugs and scraps and sometimes dirt to stay alive. Torvin was quiet for many blinks, digesting what his friend had told him. The poet continued his rant, and the few security patrolling nearby ignored him.
my friend, Torvin said. What did they... were you?
They beat me, David said. It was nothing. I was in and out in a day for being insubordinate. I don't think the captain cared much for the security guard who charged me. At any rate, he was never seen on this street again. Look, now, it is clear, and we should go sell what we can. I want to get home and check on my Annie. She worries about me in times like this. Both men strapped on their little folding tables that fit around their waists and hurriedly neatened their wares. As they stepped into the muddy street, Torvin heard the poet's hoarse voice exhort him, "Brother, brother, let freedom ring!" Remember that I have power. You believe yourself miserable, but I can make you so wretched that the light of day will be hateful to you. You are my creator, but I am your master. Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, Vachon Literature Repository. Spider Nevi watched Rico pull the gangway up and onto the deck of the Flying Fish. Then he manipulated the sensor for a close view of Rico's back as he turned away. "Lasgun there," Nevi said, and tapped a finger against the screen. "Belt, middle of the back, carries himself like a fighter." Nevi never once glanced at the security officer watching the screen at his side. As the Flying Fish departed moorage, he switched to another sensor at the mouth of the harbor, one that confirmed Crista Galli's presence on board. At Nevi's command, the sensor zoomed in on the cabin of the passing foil, revealing Lapouche in the co-pilot's seat and Crista Galli buckled in behind him. Ozette sat to her left, behind the pilot, and was speaking to her. Nevi recognized the pilot, Elvira, and cursed under his breath. "If your security launch tries an intercept, it will be outclassed," he said. "What then?" "There will be a show of force," Zentz said. "Then a warning shot." "And then?" Zentz cleared his throat, stroked the swollen area near the middle of his face that functioned as a nose.
Shoot to disable.
Nevi snorted at the ridiculousness of it. A laser cannon strike on a hydrogen ram foil could ignite a fireball 1,000 meters wide. He thought that a rather narrow definition of disable. Zentz continued, flustered at Nevi's silence.
The director declared a state of security almost a year ago, he said. You know the routine, mandatory interception and search of all vessels except company ferries that enter or leave catalogued. Search of any air or ground craft entering or leaving the perimeter.
Nevi let Zentz go on with his tedious recital. Flattery's precious preserve was his nest, and Nevi knew he would take no chances here. But Nevi was sure that any interception of the flying fish right now could easily be bungled into a disaster of the greatest proportions. Flattery had just called him to duty because Zentz had permitted such a bungle. Flattery had just called him to duty because Zentz had permitted such a bungle.
We want Shadowbox and Crista Galley, Nevi said. To exterminate nerve runners, you have to burn their nest. This foil, intact, will lead us there.
Zentz, ramrod stiff in his seat, cleared his dry throat and offered,
We suspect Lapouche has been a shadow commandant for about 6 years.
Your crew is not to interfere with this vessel,
Nevi ordered. He keyed in the security frequency on his console.
You can give the order right here.
He flipped a switch and looked Zentz in the eyes. Zentz cleared his throat again, then leaned toward the microphone.
Zentz here, 34 disregard white class 3 foil departing harbor.
Sir, a young voice came back. By the director's orders, we're to seize any vessels sighted but not searched. Zentz paused, and in that pause, Nevi enjoyed the exquisite dilemma that was now added to the security chief's fatigue. There was only one way out, one way to satisfy the by-the-book greenhorn officer, one way to keep the director at bay.
I searched it personally at dockside, Zentz said. We know what's on board.
Nevi switched off the connection, satisfied with the choice he'd made in Zentz. If it came right down to it, Zentz would be the perfect sacrifice in the holiest of games, survival.
Young officers haven't learned their priorities yet,
Zentz said, forcing a smile.
They have only learned fear, Nevi said. They mature when they understand greed.
Zentz rubbed at the back of his thick neck, only half listening. He had spent the entire night interrogating 2 of his best guards as an example to the rest, and now that Nevi had ordered Crista Galley out of his grasp, it looked as if he was going to have to go through it all again. From the moment he'd freed the foil, Zentz could feel a tightening at his collar that he didn't like. It was a noose-like grip, unrelenting as baldness. Cold. Nevi would be the death of him. This he was beginning to understand. With this came the understanding that there was nothing he could do about it, nowhere he could hide. The dasher coiled to spring. That was what Spider Nevi saw when Zentz met his gaze. Wouldn't it be what Zentz saw when Nevi met his gaze? I think it should be the other way. It doesn't matter.
I am going to make you a hero, Spider Nevi said. I have a part for you to play if we hand the director's shadow box. If we hand the director shadow box, we hand him back Pandora. The implications for you and me are obvious. You will, of course, prefer this to whatever the director has in mind for you here.
Zentz did not clear his throat. He did not speak. He nodded once, and his grotesque lump of a jaw quivered with what Nevi presumed was the clenching of his teeth.
It will be just you and I, Nevi said. The more we can tell the director about these vermin and their warrens, the happier he will be. You desperately need to make him happy.
The white foil slipped under the bay's waves, keeping the burning wreckage between itself and the Vachon security foil opposite. They would be suspicious of not being challenged during an alert, this Nevi knew, but he still had the advantage. They knew he was behind him. They knew he was behind them. They didn't know how close. They knew he was behind them. They didn't know how close. Much better. Nevi used the sensor system to pan the riot that was now in full bloom in catalogued.
They're working their way toward the preserve, he noted. Can your men handle this?
Zent's wattles rose in indignation.
Security is my business too, Mr. Nevi. I handle it my way. We will let them throw their tantrum and trash their nest. Then we will slaughter them here at the wall. They must be made to be very sorry that they attacked the preserve. The damage they do to their streets will keep the survivors busy for a time.
Nevi flipped off the sensors and stood, straightening his tight suit with a tug.
Secure one of Flattery's personal foils, Nevi snapped. Full gear for 2, plus a week's rations. See to it there's coffee. Meet me in the preserve hangar in 1/2 hour.
His eyebrows indicated dismissal, and Zentz rose to leave. Nevi saw the seed of hope in Zentz's eyes, a seed that Nevi would nourish to a rich blossom and snip, when necessary, to make just the right bouquet for the director. I consider the positions of kings and rulers as that of dust motes. I look upon the judgment of right and wrong as the serpentine dance of a dragon, and the rise and fall of beliefs as but traces left by the 4 seasons. Buddha. Crista reclined in a leather crew couch that smelled faintly of Rico. She gripped the armrests, eyes closed. Noise and the press of the crowd had always frightened her, at least since she had been blasted free of the kelp 5 years past. Memory of her life before that blast seemed hopelessly lost. The supple leather couch and roomy cabin muted the pier-side clamor. The others had finished casting off and were returning to the cabin. A green circle flashed on the pilot's screen for each hatch they dogged behind them. Their pilot, a severe, sensuous woman in her mid-30s, prepared the ballast tank pumps and other pre-dive systems. She spoke the sequences aloud crisply as she completed her checkoff. Taking on ballast. 3 fuel tanks flared together from the fire at the center of the bay, and Crista felt the concussions puff her lungs. A 3-headed rage of fire boiled up from the waters off their bow, heeling the foil over in a lurch to starboard. Ben and Rico sealed off the cabin and strapped in.
Going down?
Rico asked and laughed. The pilot didn't miss a beat.
No security challenge, she reported. 20-meter level-off mandatory until clear of marker 557.
Since boarding the foil, Crista had felt a calm such as she'd not known for several years, in spite of the madness outside. She felt something pull her toward the mouth of the harbor, to the open water beyond. Ben handed her a child's dessert stick from his pocket. "You'll need the energy," he said. "Once we're clear of the harbor, we can raid the galley. Is the cabin air too dry for you?"
No, she shook her head. It feels fine, like my room at the preserve.
This was the cool, processed air that Crista had breathed for 5 years at the preserve, free of the charcoal odors of the street braziers, the whiff of raw iodine, braziers. It's not brazier. Well, I think you can do it either way, but I believe it's braziers. Anyway, it's the things that hold fire. Where were we? This was the cool, processed air that Crista had breathed for 5 years at the preserve, free of the charcoal odors of the street braziers, the whiff of raw iodine from the beaches and scant wet blooms of upland slopes. It was air swept nearly clean of humanity, the humanity that idolized Crista Gali, the humanity she had only known now for less than a single day. It was mid-morning yet, second sun just clearing the horizon, and Crista felt the race of sunlight through her surging pulse. She was outside the preserve now. Regardless of the circumstances, she intended never to go back, never to be a prisoner of walls again. "Watch yourself," an ancient one inside her warned, "that you don't become a prisoner of action, of words. And remember, when you make a choice, you abandon freedom of choice." She'd had no choice in her appearance among humans, and flattery had given her no choices since that time. She had been plucked from the vine of the kelp and dropped into flattery's basket. Crista thought that if the people of Pandora thought her a god, it was time she acted like one. Now that the water had begun closing about the foil, she felt an energy surge her blood that she'd never felt before. What could she do that would help herself and these people who were still alien to her? Even Ben, though she felt a love for him, was a stranger. She had tried daily for 5 years and could summon no memories of her earlier life. Everyone is a stranger. She'd had this thought before, but today it didn't surround her with the loneliness that it had in the past. She'd touched Ben Ozette and seen that he, too, had these thoughts, and he'd lived among humans for his whole life. "This is what they could learn from the kelp," she mused. "We are not alone because we are elements of one being. We are not alone because we are elements of one being." Emphasis on the right syllable. She listened as Rico muttered loudly to no one in particular.
"Operations won't like it," he said. "Under no circumstances is she to be allowed near the sea. Of course, they are welcome to drop in here and give us a hand after they promised us the airstrip."
She could tell that Rico felt more comfortable in the foil. He had smiled, finally, and though he seemed to be complaining, he was complaining with a smile. "Ever ride a foil?" Ben asked her. "Never," she said, her wide eyes trying to take in everything at once. "I've watched them from the preserve. This one is beautiful." "Let me point out our 3-way option," he said, and indicated certain diagrams on his control panel. "We are riding Pandora's finest vehicle on, above, or under the sea. The hydrofoil mode is fast on the surface, but the foil struts clog up easily in the thick kelp. Except in flight, these Class 1 foils use the old Bangasser... Yes. These Class 1 foils use the old Bangasser converter to retrieve hydrogen from seawater, a virtually infinite source of fuel. If we go to the air, we have to remember that the fuel tanks do get empty." He glanced over at Elvira's indifference and shrugged. "We're going down under," he said. "Their lasguns no good underwater. But this guarantees we'll be tracked. All the kelpways are heavily wired."
"It might be something bigger than flattery doing the tracking," Rico interrupted. "Heads up, we're going down."
He paused, and, when there was no response from Ben, he assisted Elvira with the dive checkout. While they busied themselves with tasks at their consoles, Crista watched the water close over the cabin. Ironically, it was probably Flattery who best understood her life among the kelp. In his hibernation, Flattery had lain nearly lifeless, his vitals monitored and maintained by several devices on and inside his body. According to Flattery's lab people, Crista Gali had lived in symbiosis with the kelp, 100 million kelp cilia inside her, breathing for her, feeding her. They claimed that these tiny projections supported her for her first 20 years, until Flattery had this stand of kelp blown up, lobotomized to the needs of current control. "It's like being an embryo until you're 20,
she'd told Ben. "There's no other way I can explain it. You don't eat, breathe, or move around much. The only people you meet are in the dreams that Avata brings. Now I don't know what was dream and what was me. It's all confused. There was no me until that day. But Flattery knows something of how this feels. So does that dwarf Macintosh. And that brain that Flattery's hooking up to this ship."
It sounds horrible, Ben had said, and she realized that it probably did. In dive mode, the engine shift vibrated so much that it rocked her from side to side in her seat, forcing her attention back to the present. Crista fought back a tear and couldn't turn away from the green water surging ahead of the cabin.
"There are laws against touching me."
She thought of that kiss again, the one that had lasted only a blink in real time but would replay forever in her mind. Even in the hot climate of Catalogued, Crista wore the coverings dictated by the director. But alone, in the privacy of her suite, she had often shucked her clothes in spite of Flattery's censors, which she knew to be everywhere. Any portion of her skin left bare tingled at its awareness of breezes and light. If she noticed nothing else in a day, she noticed the 1,000 tiny touches between humans around her. It had become difficult to think of herself as human. Now, having glimpsed the public idolatry focused on her, she felt the frayed tether weaken even more. A surge in cabin air pressure popped her ears, and the great plasma glass dome of the cabin settled completely under the waves. She caught herself holding her breath and cautioned herself to relax. She heard the susurrations of voices rise and fall with the pulse of the engines. "Are you all right?" Crista felt herself rising above Ben's voice to the ceiling of the cabin, through the ceiling and higher yet, above the preserve. She was 1,000 meters above Catalogued, and beneath her writhed a mass of brown tentacles. She was a highlighter, tacking her great sail across the breeze to keep the shadow of their foil in sight below. She was aware of herself, of her own being inside the foil, but felt every ripple along the highlighter's supple body as well. Ben Ozette was calling her name, barely audible at this distance. It seemed she shared an umbilicus from his navel to her own, and he was pulling her in by it, reeling her back to the flying fish hand over hand. Ben touched her cheek, and Crista snapped awake. He did not take his hand away. "You scared me," he said. "Your eyes were open, and you quit breathing." As she sat forward, resisting his gentle pressure, she saw that Rico also stood over her, an open medical kit beside his feet. He was wearing gloves. What had been blue sky covering the plaza of the cabin was now the green-gray twilight of the middle deep. They were riding a kelpway, and somehow she knew that they had already cleared the harbor, heading north. Rico stared at Ben's hand stroking her cheek, then at Crista.
"I was gone," she said, "somewhere above us. I was a highlighter watching this foil, and you reached out and brought me back."
"A highlighter?" Ben laughed, but it was a tight, very nervous laugh. "That's a strange enough dream." Gas bag from the sky, how her tentacles writhe, for me. Remember that song? Come and Gone?
"I remember that it was some tasteless play on words, ridiculing the highlighter's spore-casting function, and this was no dream."
She saw the snap in her voice reflected in the tightening of his lips, a closing off that she didn't know how to stop. Rico turned without saying anything and stowed the kit beneath his seat. Crista smelled something like anger, something like fear pulse from Rico's turned back. All of her senses washed back into her trembling body, delivering her into a state of hypersensitivity that she had never known before. The undersea landscape of blues and greens blurred past her, like the settlement had blurred past her. Too much wonder. too little time. Of everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required, and of him to whom they have entrusted much, they will demand the more. Jesus. Beatriz was awaiting her cue for the 2-minute wind-up of Newsbreak when the fully armed security detachment entered the studio, sliding from the hatchway with their backs along the walls. They hung back beyond the fringe of lights, which blazed their reflection in the squad leader's mirrored sunglasses. Her mouth was suddenly dry, her throat tightening, and she was due for the wrap-up in 30 seconds. Still on the air, she thought. The preempt isn't running yet. Her console showed her what the 3 cameras saw, but the monitor at the rear of the studio showed what went out on the air. Now it showed Harlan fast-talking the weather. It could be bypassed. She shuddered in her newfound paranoia and thought that the floor director would probably stop Harlan if they'd gone to tape, but she couldn't be sure anymore. Maybe they want to see just how much more I'd try to say. She had deviated from the prompter amid the waving hands of the producer and director. She hadn't linked Ben with the Gali kidnapping. She'd just listed him as missing, along with Rico, on assignment. She noted signs of surprise and muttering among the crew when she said it. Both Ben and Rico were admired in the industry. Indeed, many of Rico's inventions and innovations made the holo industry possible. Holo industry. Harlan finished morning fishing patterns, and the countdown went to Beatriz. The officer of the security squad had moved up in the studio and placed a man beside each of her cameramen. She had the stubborn, weighty thought that her crew might not be on the shuttle this afternoon. Harlan finished and smiled from the monitor, and the floor director's fingers counted her down. 3, 2, 1... That's our morning news break from our launch site studios. Evening news break will be broadcast live from our orbital assembly station. Our crew will have the opportunity to accompany the OMC, Organic Mental Core, and take you, the viewer, through each step of installation and testing. Other news that we will follow at that time, the abduction of Crista. As you know, there is still no word from her abductors and no ransom demand. More on this and other news at 18. Good morning. Beatriz held her smile until the red light faded out, then slumped back into her chair with a sigh. The studio erupted around her in a babble of questions.
What's this about Ben? Rico too? Where were they? Where were they? Does the company know about this?
They cared. She knew they would care, that most of Pandora probably cared, and that was her power. As the mirrored sunglasses made their way through the crew toward her, she knew that there was nothing he could do. Even if they'd preempted and run the canned show, the crew knew, and there would be no keeping this leak plugged. When the security officer reached her, the babbling in the studio fell quiet.
I must ask you to come with us.
These were the words she'd been afraid she might hear. These words, "come with us," were what Ben had tried to warn her about for the last couple of years. He had said more than once, if they ask you to come, don't do it. They will take you away and you will disappear. They will take the people around you away. If they say this to you, make whatever happens happen in public, where they can't hide it from the world. Roll cameras 1, 2, and 3, she announced. Then she turned to Gus, the floor director. Were we preempted?
No,
he said, and his voice trembled. He was sweating heavily, even though she was the one under the lights.
If a preempt signal was sent, I didn't see it. You went out live.
God bless Gus, she thought. She turned to the security. Now, Captain, I didn't get your name. What was it you wanted of me?
What, then, shall we do? Leo Tolstoy.
Trimmed and ready, Elvira reported. No pursuit. Course? When Ben didn't answer, Rico said,
Victoria.
Elvira grunted. It was obvious to Crista that Elvira trusted both Ben and Rico completely. She had seen loyalty at the Preserve, but never trust. She had manipulated the distrust rampant throughout Flattery's organization to open the hatch for her escape. That same distrust would bring Flattery down, once and for all. Of this she was certain. Flattery's people hoard information like spinnerets at the web, she told Ben. It's barter to them, a medium of exchange. So no one has the full picture, and rumor guides the hand that blesses or damns. That's why Shadowbox has threatened him more than anything else.
There's food in the galley,
Rico announced, and she saw the accompanying green indicator flash on the console at her right hand.
Ben, you two take a break. Bring me back some coffee. We're a few hours out yet. Elvira would like the usual.
I can't remember what voice I used for Rico. I'm sorry. We're going to be faking it until we figure it out.
Ben led Crista to the galley behind the curtain, with a hand at her elbow. Her legs seemed wobbly in spite of the even-keeled submersible run of the foil. She had been hungry now for hours. Her head ached with it, and the memory of broiled cebet over on the village air charged her stomach.
We live in the galley, Ben told her. When we're on a job, this room is jammed. It's where everything happens.
She stepped from the semi-dim cabin into a warm yellow glow. The galley was a bright room of wood, yellow panel, and brass. She could imagine a Holovision nightly news crew spread out over the two tables with coffee and notes in the half hour before airtime. It was a clean, well-lighted space. Hollow cubes of the crew in action on various assignments sat in a rack against the inboard bulkhead. Crista sat at the first of two hexagonal tables and pulled down a couple of the cubes to look at. "These really stand out at you," she said, moving the holograms through different angles of light. "Nothing in Flattery's collection matches these for quality."
Thanks to Rico, Ben said. He's a born inventor. He'd be a rich man today if Flattery's Merman Mercantile hadn't jumped into the middle of things. Our stuff is good because Rico makes up the equipment himself. We always roll with the best.
"She's very pretty," Crista said, holding a scene of Ben and Beatriz with their arms around each other. "You two have worked together for a long time. Were you in love, the two of you?" Ben cleared his throat and pushed a few buttons. She heard the whir of galley machinery at work.
Now it's hard to know whether we were truly in love or whether we'd just survived so much together that we felt no one else could understand. Except maybe Rico, of course.
"And you made love with her?"
Yes.
Ben stood with his back to her, staring at the backs of his hands on the countertop.
Yes, we made love. For several years. Given our lives, it would have been impossible that we didn't become intimates.
"But now you're not?" She saw the slightest shake of the back of his head.
No.
"Does that make you sad? Do you miss her?" When he turned to her, he saw the consternation on his face, the struggle he seemed to be having with words. She thought perhaps he'd started out to lie to her, but with a sigh he changed his mind.
Yes, he said, I miss her. Not as a lover, that's past and would be too clumsy to rekindle. I miss working with her because she's so goddamn good at getting people to talk in front of cameras. Rico handled the techno stuff, and between us, she and I could get to the bottom of most anything. I think she's in love with Macintosh up in current control, but I don't think she's admitted it yet. If it's true, it should make life easier for both of us.
"If one of you is in love, then that takes the heat off?"
Ben laughed. I suppose you could say that, yes.
She lowered her gaze to the cube that her hands passed back and forth in front of her.
Could you ever be in love with me?
He laughed a soft laugh and gripped her shoulder. I remember everything about you, he said. That first day I saw you in Flattery's lab, when you looked at me over your shoulder and smiled. I had a feeling when our eyes met like I've never had before. I still get it every time I see you, think of you, dream of you. Isn't that something like love? Her pale skin flushed red from the neck of her dress to the roots of her shaggy white hair at her forehead.
It's the same for me, she said, but I have nothing to compare with. And how could I live up to whatever you've shared with her?
Love isn't a competition, he says. It happens. There were tough times living with B, but I don't have to bring up the bad parts to punish myself for missing the friendship, the good parts. I think she and I are both people who refuse to dislike someone we've loved. She's an exceptional person, or I wouldn't have loved her. There was a lot of bliss, a lot of turmoil, no boredom at all. No boredom at all. The bliss part she called our convergent lines. Ultimately, we each blamed the other for being impossible when it was our situation we couldn't bear.
Did you take the job of interviewing me because you knew that she was working with Flattery at the Preserve?
He laughed again. You have me pegged, don't you? That's a yes and no answer. I thought, and still think, that your story is the most exciting thing I can show to the rest of Pandora. I wouldn't have tried for it otherwise. But yes, I did hope, in a moment of wallowing in loneliness, that I'd see her again.
And?
I did. The thrill was gone, and we were good friends. Good friends who still work very well together.
You knew that Flattery was buying us both off with those interviews, didn't you?
Crista asked. He set her hat beside her on the deck and peeled off her headband and mantilla. Mantilla? It's a double L, I'm not sure. She gave her matted hair a shake. She was relieved that he smiled at this as he gathered their utensils at the sideboard. I figured it out, he said. That's why... this. Flattery pulled the corporate strings, denying airtime before the first can was shot, but no one was told. I was paid, you were interviewed at length on 5 occasions, and this was the story of the century. He paid to have it done so he could kill it.
Yes, she said, with no pangs of conscience whatsoever. Look what it got him. We are here, together. I, at least, am happier. And hungry. She indicated her disguise, in spite of how it looks.
Ben patted the lump of clothing strapped to her belly. And fulfilled, too, he teased. He dared to stroke her cheek again with a smile and then busied himself setting out the food. She watched the seascape as their foils slithered through the kelpways, her quick breaths fogging the plaz. Though the Preserve was a seaside base camp, Crista had never once... Oh, I misread that. Though the Preserve was a seaside base camp, Crista never once had been allowed... What? Oh, that's why. No wonder I keep reading it wrong. It's just a long sentence. Though the Preserve was a seaside base camp, Crista never once had been allowed down to the shore. Flattery feared her relationship with the kelp, and saw to it that others around her did, too. Ben nudged her shoulder and pointed through the starboard port toward the skeletal remains of a kelp outpost, dimly visible in the foil's deep-water lights. The kelp itself had been burned back to knobby stumps for 1,000 meters all around. Report says kelp killed 3 families here, 16 people, he said. Vashon Security did their retaliatory number on the kelp, as you can see. They call it pruning. Though it was a shadowland beneath a weak wash of light, and though the engines had quieted in submersible mode, Crista focused on the tingle at her shoulder where Ben had touched her. She fought back tears of joy at his touch. How could she explain this to him, who touched people and was touched at will? He pulled 2 hot trays out of the unit and set them on the table. He dealt out napkins, spoons, chopsticks. She knew she needed food, strength, but some dreaminess had caught her up. Yes, it's dreaminess, not dreariness. But some dreaminess caught her up since boarding the foil, and she didn't really want to shake it. Sunlight strengthened her. This she knew. The beautiful kiss from Ben, that strengthened her too. Something about this Rico Lapouche also strengthened her, but she didn't know what. Crista glanced again at Ben, beside her, as his eyes searched the dimness of the passing landscape. "The preserve is under attack," Ben said. She didn't respond. "You can watch it on screen if you want." He indicated the briefing screen against the aft galley bulkhead. She preferred the old word wall, but not many used it. Tribute to Pandora's watery history. Though Ben talked on, Crista concentrated on her meal, eating half of Ben's as well, leaving him the vegetables. His words buzzed like a fat bee in the warm galley air. All the while a lullaby kept running through her head that no human ear had heard in 2,000 years. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." She had learned to be cautious wandering her memories, too. When the flashbacks started, sometimes they took over, unpeeling whole sections of other people's lives. They lasted longer each time, dragging Crista through hours of lightning-fast memories. There was no focus, no fine-tuning, simply off or on. First it was blinks, then seconds, then moments. A minute of high-speed memory, lived with a full sensory component, could wring an entire lifetime out of the wet cloth of her mind. The last flashback had terminated only after exhaustion and heavy sedation. It had lasted nearly 4 hours. Though conscious immediately, she had been dazed and unable to speak for 3 days. Flattery had used this as an excuse to further limit her life at his compound, and to adjust her medications. She felt that same dazedness now, but no onslaught of memories, no sweat, no fear. "Crista golly," Ben said, "you have quite the life awaiting you. You are the one, Her Holiness, a living legend. You are the most important person alive today." She felt an uneasiness at what he said, and sought reason to feel uneasy at the way he said it. She found none. "The one?" she muttered. "The one to do what?" You are the one for whom they have waited in suffering for so long," he said. "Depending on whom you believe, you are the last salvation of humankind, or you are the Kelp's secret weapon to eradicate humans forever. In your glimpse of the people of Calalot, you must have felt your power. There is a lot for you to learn, and quickly. We will help you with that. But because one does not touch a god, one does not come before a god scratching one's fleas, you will see only the best side of the faithful, and the worst side of the rest." "When the people know me, know it's all a—" "They will not know you," he interrupted. "Not the you that you mean. They want to believe something else too much to stop them. Faith can do that. You must be careful. You must be quiet. And you must be a mystery. We need that mystery to beat flattery. You will see plenty of need before much longer, and I think you will agree with me. Eat the rest if you are hungry. We may not always be among those who have food." She was hungry. Very hungry. She drank the broth from the soup, left the vegetables, and picked out the meat. She also picked out the meat from the sandwich he made her. She ate the bread in tiny bites to make it last longer. She thought she could tell them all something of need. Touch was a human need, and she was mostly human. At times, someone would touch her by accident or quickly in a breathless dare. The daring ones, she recognized now, must be the religious zealots, the Zavatans that Ben had told her about. There was no way to know which way it would be. embarrassment, or death. When she let Ben kiss her the previous night, she had known it was possible that he would die. She had the strongest feeling that she would die too, and somehow that made it all right. For the first time she felt mortal and risked it. When neither of them died, she even kissed him back a little. Her heart pumped something like fear even at the memory. Afterward, in his green eyes so nearly like her own, there was the glitter of laughter and a good dare taken.
He looked so happy.
She remembered that few people around her had ever looked happy, except the director. Mostly they seemed afraid.
"Why did you kiss me?" she asked.
A flush crept out of her collar. She didn't want to look at him, but finally couldn't help it. He was smiling. "Because you let me."
"You weren't afraid?"
"Afraid you wouldn't like it? Yes. Afraid of what you might do to me? No." He laughed. "I have a theory. If people expect to go crazy when they touch you, then that's what they do. It's a hysteria, that's all." She put her palm on his chest and said, evenly,
"You don't know anything about me. You were lucky. We were lucky."
She patted his shirt.
"You didn't sleep," she said. "If it's necessary that one of us sit up, I can do it from now on."
Something dark passed over his expression. "There were arrangements," he said. "With some of the women we'll meet up coast. You were to stay with them. It was assumed that you would prefer—"
"It has to be you," she insisted. "You have no woman in your life, isn't that right?"
"That's right, but it's not a matter of—"
"What is it a matter of?" she blurted. "Don't you like me?"
Maybe it was the surprise that lifted the darkness from his face, or maybe it was the blush. "I like you," he said. "I like you a lot."
"Then it's settled," she said. "I can stay with you."
"It's not as easy as that."
"It is if we make it so," she said. "Get some rest between now and then. If you really are immune to me, you're going to need it."
Intervention into destiny by God or man requires the most delicate care. Dwarf Macintosh, Kelp Master, Current Control. Might just be Macintosh, but the I is capitalized. Raja Flattery's private bunker lay safely beneath almost 30 meters of Pandoran stone. High, dome-like ceilings held back the psychological crush, and some well-chosen holograms draped the walls with scenes from outside the walls. Above him, in the rubble of his surface compound, Flattery's security finished the last roundup of resistors. "Stand down the fighting and send in the medics." Thanks to the highlighters, there would be a lot of burns. He spoke the order into his console and didn't wait for acknowledgement. His bunker area was honeycombed with cubicles, and those cubicles were occupied by the underlings who carried out his orders and asked no questions. Fewer than a handful had personal access to the director. Ironic how a little fire can cool things down. His security teams mopped up the carnage overhead and formed stark little shadows hunching under Pandora's unforgiving suns. Though the sterile images of battle came to his bunker by hollow, the director thought he sniffed a distinct stench of burning hair beside him at the console. The imagination, the mind, what incredible tools. His personal security team waited just outside his hatch, a precaution. There was no place on Pandora that he could flee to that would be as secure as his own compound. Certainly there was nowhere as luxurious. A brunch of cebets simmered in Orcus red. A brunch of cebets simmered in Orcus red, spread out at his left hand. There was a fine bite to these Pandoran wines that pleased him, even early in the day. "Captain," he spoke to the shadowy figure at his hatch, "that camera team, were they deployed as scheduled?" "As scheduled?"
"Yes, sir," The captain's back stiffened. Captain Brood's men have been at the launch site since daybreak. They know what you want.
And this holovision and the holovision people, the ones the studio sent out to cover this mess.
Captain Brood suggested letting them film, sir. When it's done, his team can access their film as well as their cameras and other equipment. He says...
Flattery shouted at his attendant. Captain, did anyone give this Captain Brood permission to start thinking? Did you? The stiffened spine stiffened even more.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Flattery was thankful that the shadows hid the man's face. There was no profile to it. Where the captain's nose should be, there were two moist slits that separated a very wide set of eyes. When Flattery talked with Nevi, at least he could focus on the man's eyes. This man wasn't that interesting, and Flattery had all too much time to dwell on the malformed face. Flattery spoke in his most reasonable tone. I want nothing to go on Holovision today without my prior approval. Brood's team is to receive priority treatment, even if we have to replace the entire production staff. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Get their manager into my office within the hour, that puffy little maggot, Millhouse. We need cooperation, and I don't want any slip-ups. Tell him to bring some canned stuff that we can use to preempt today until Brood's men get their tapes. No sense in the rest of the world getting inspired by what's going on here.
Right, sir. Right away, sir.
Captain.
Yes, sir.
You're a good man, Captain. Your family will be pleased that you're working with me.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
There we go. I keep forgetting who it is. I have a voice set for Brood, and I keep forgetting that this is not Brood. Brood may or may not be important for reasons that were explained or hinted at in the previous... I think it was Brood. In the previous stream. The man's back retreated through the main hatchway to the offices. Flattery sighed. He watered the wine a bit and raised a glass to his own firmness under duress. What a wanker. He watered the wine a bit and raised a glass to his own firmness under duress. He toasted his search teams, who fanned out even now to burn the last of the bodies up in the rocks. This was a Zavatan influence, this burning of bodies. It was a practice that Flattery welcomed and supported. The traditional burials at sea turned into a ghastly sight and a health hazard on Pandora's few beaches. Bodies washing up everywhere. He suppressed a shudder at the memory. It was more than disgusting. It was a religious and economic disaster. Every nitwit who touched the kelp in the process came back a prophet. The entire Pandoran social structure was shattered by the recent geological changes alone, but this kelp business made it a madhouse. Women of the settlements wouldn't buy fish for a week after a traditional sea burial. They didn't want to take the chance on eating fish that had eaten old Uncle Dak. There were times, early in Flattery's rise to power, when he had seen hundreds of embroidered burial bags wash up on the beach at a time, and the local fleets wouldn't fish for a month. Flattery's answer was to buy out the importers, stockpile everything, and control the seaways. Control, he muttered. That's the key. Control. Flattery toasted the hollow that played in the center of his quarters. His men had been forced to inflict heavier casualties than he preferred, and it would raise hob with the workforce just at a time when he needed things smooth. Still, their way was best. There were plenty of replacements, though starvation made them dim-witted weaklings. Things would be slow during the training period. My way, he thought. I've had to teach them everything. Left to themselves, these Pandorans couldn't get anything else. Couldn't get anything done. Left to themselves, these Pandorans couldn't get anything done. Flattery still marveled at his own progress. He'd built and fortified a city, unified politics and industry under one banner, and prepared a void ship for launch. The void ship would present them with more options than this stinking hellhole of a planet, and Alyssa Marsh, the OMC, would point the way. Pandorans had been here for hundreds of years and hadn't made nearly the progress he'd made in the past 25. The trap topside had been sprung and was nearly ready for cleaning. This might come close to destroying any significant shadow resistance. There couldn't be many of them left, and the rest, well, he'd see to it that they were too hungry to fight. Except among themselves for scraps. My scraps. Flattery's losses, other than replaceable materials, were minimal. He pushed the meal aside and drained his glass. The mop-up operation would be a bore. The last of the mob would be torched outside the hatch in a matter of 2 or 3 hours. He keyed in his command post and noted the air of celebration among the junior officers. Nothing like a well-executed victory to lift morale, he thought. Nothing more dangerous than an army with no one to fight. Flattery knew that they would not turn on him, or each other, as long as they had the shadows, food thieves, and the kelp to contend with. The idle brain is the devil's playground, he chuckled. Once again, Flattery keyed the voice frequency on his console. Update me on the holovision foil's position, Colonel. Still submerged, Colonel Jaffe reported. About 50 clicks down coast from Victoria. Any sign of escort? No, the foil is proceeding solo through the accustomed channels. And the kelp is not interfering? Not exactly, Jaffe said. Our instruments show a marked increase in the tension on the grid. The kelp's fighting the signal from current control. The grid is holding? Yes, sir. We're preparing to detour traffic to the outside in case we lose it. Tension's rising fast. We're getting some oscillations at this point. All vessels with navcom are probably getting instrument disturbances too. We'll try to warn them, but as you know, the sonic transmission stations down under have a very limited range. I understand, Colonel. Instruct current control that this is a priority 1 situation. They are to maintain this grid at all costs. Stump that stand if you have to. Will do, sir. Currents remain stable. Are they to be intercepted in Victoria? That is not your jurisdiction, Colonel. That is not your jurisdiction, Colonel, Flattery snapped. A White Warrior team will take care of it. We will root out the brass of this shadow operation this time, I'm sure. Notify me of any sign of kelp interference anywhere. He broke contact without waiting for a reply, and smiled. Yes, root them out, he thought, but not all of them. They will find new leaders. Then we will hunt them down, too. He poured himself half a glass of wine and filled the rest with water. Moderation, he mused. It's a lot like patience. We will prune them back like my roses to the very brink of death. They will always blossom under our control, always ready for the picking. Flattery stood at his console and stretched. He liked the privacy of his bunker. It was as spacious as the compound above him, with all of the attendant comforts. The view through his view screens was not nearly as satisfying as real Plaz or looking over the real world. His world. Soon his void ship would be manned and stocked, and he would hand over the husk of this world to anyone who wanted it. He planned on taking Beatriz to Touche with him. Flattery had monitored her broadcast, as was his custom. He noted both her loyalty to Ozette and her restraint. It proved she had due respect for his powers, but not a blind fear. This he admired in her. Still, he did not want to underestimate Ozette's influence on her. The man had been pouring poison into her ear for quite a few years. Flattery smiled. He wasn't one to leave much to chance, and he had a backup plan for Beatriz to Touche.
She would meet Captain Brood, one of Flattery's more innovative white warriors. Brood's plan would take out a number of those troublesome holovision people and finish a clean sweep of that little rat's nest. They would go the way Ozette was going. That would teach the lot of them to back off when the director said, back off. And it would keep them from helping out that shadow box wherever it was hidden. I expected them to get on the air right away with Crista, he thought. What does that tell us? That they hadn't got her to their broadcasting equipment yet. He smiled in anticipation. They'd better hurry. He laughed at the thought. They won't want to broadcast what they get once the drugs take over. Captain Brood's plan would clear out holovision and soften up Beatriz Tatouche. Flattery always liked a plan that worked on more than one level. Brood would be the bad guy, and at just the right moment Flattery would whisk her out of Brood's clutches. Then she would join him gladly in the command cabin of the void ship. He planned an opulence for that cabin befitting a leader of his caliber, a woman of her grace and beauty. Our children will populate the stars, he mused. He drank to the future and to the careful execution of plans. She shows no sign of the Pandoran mutations, he thought. He'd made sure that she'd had no surgical corrections to mask any of the Pandoran defects. We could start quite a world, the two of us. In his wine-tinted reverie, Flattery saw the two of them naked in a great garden, heady with the scent of orchids and ripe fruit. The ready light winked on over the hatchway to the greens, indicating a foil approaching the docking well. Only Flattery and Spider Nevi knew the coded sequence for docking inside the greens. He glanced at his timepiece, then grunted his surprise and opened the hatch. Nevi's a quick one, he thought. Too quick. Others, like Brood, guess at what pleases me. Nevi figures out my thoughts, my moves, even before I do. That will have to be dealt with. He stood and adjusted his black dasher-skin suit. When he wore this suit in the greens, his pets were much more affectionate, more attentive to his needs. He tried his look of disdain on the mirror. It still worked. The suit was a nice touch. His console reported on the docking foil and identified 2 occupants. That fool, he thought, bringing Zents into the greens. A waste. Too late to worry now. When the time came for Zents to be silenced, he would remind himself to have Nevi attend to it personally. The greens was the director's preserve below the preserve. Plasteel welders and laser cannons had spent 2 years quarrying 4 square kilometers out of Pandora's stone. Crystallized particles of the old kelp root glittered like stars overhead. The domed ceiling arched to 20 meters at the center and shone with the black gloss of melted rock. The Greens itself was a lush underground park maintained by an old islander biologist. At times, Flattery called it the Ark. No one who had worked inside the Greens had lived to leave the compound. Spider Nevi came and went as he chose, and exterminated those who could not. They were easily replaced, and just as easily forgotten. The hatchway from the director's quarters in his bunker opened to the edge of a deep saltwater pool, circular, about 50 meters in diameter. A blue glow rimmed the lower portion, light diffusing in from the lamps installed around the lip outside. This had been the rootway gnawed by the kelp, the last vestige of a great oracle. A gentle grassy slope led down to the pool, as well as 3 small streams that issued from the rock bulkheads. Animals did not do as well in the artificial light as Flattery would have liked, but his flowers, trees, and grasses thrived. From where he stood inside the hatchway, Flattery admired the thickest concentration of terrestrial foliage in the world. He maintained no human security inside the Greens itself, but his secret did not want for protection.
As the bubbling hiss of the ascending foil seethed the waters of the pool, the director's trained dasher, Girth, lay in wait. I can never remember how Goethe is pronounced. I've heard it before. My brain can never remember. Girth. Geth? Guth? Girth. It's the, philosopher? I can't remember what they were. My brain isn't here right now. My brain is in the book. Sorry. He knew that the other three remained hidden, stumpy tails twitching, somewhere within a quick bound. Nevi's personal signal toned 3 times, then repeated itself. Flattery dogged the hatch behind him. The foil that rose from the pool was one of several that Flattery had designed for his own needs. These were the last foils manufactured by Merman Mercantile before the Great Quake had destroyed their manufacturing complex 2 years ago. These were capable of flight, but with a limited range and payload. They cruised faster submerged than any other models. A glance into the cabin, and Flattery put on the proper mask of disapproval for Nevi, frowning and shaking his head. Well, Mr. Zentz first. Nevi secured the foil beside one of its twins and waited on deck for Flattery to give the Dashers their all-clear signal. Zentz stood in obvious awe at the hatchway to the cabin, the snags of teeth in his lower jaw glistening saliva. At the director's hand signal, Girth slunk back into the foliage. The one he called Archangel crouched between himself and Nevi. Archangel, unlike Girth, was an extraordinary hybrid of a successful gene swap between the cats in Hybe and the hooded dashers of Pandora. They were faithful and wished to please their master, 2 traits that Flattery admired in anyone, so long as he was the master. Archangel's eyes watched Nevi's every move, and he bristled when Zentz, too, approached the director. There was another backup at-ease signal for Archangel, but Flattery did not give it. Zentz is cornered, he thought, and cornered animals commit the unexpected. Since Zentz would be killed soon, Flattery spoke freely in front of him.
Mr. Director,
Nevi said, inclining his head slightly.
Mr. Nevi.
This was their ritual greeting. Flattery had never known Nevi to shake a hand. To Flattery's knowledge, Nevi only touched the people he killed. He did not know Nevi's record with women, and did not intend to ask. Flattery smiled and indicated the greens to Zentz with a generous sweep of his hand.
Welcome to our little secret,
he said, and strolled briskly from the docking pool toward a section of fruiting trees.
Pity there isn't time for a tour. Near tropical heat, but you don't know much about the tropics, eh? Bore deep enough into the rock and you get heat. Fewer than 100 people have seen this garden, and fewer than 5 survive.
Zentz swallowed audibly.
I've never seen anything like this.
Flattery did not doubt him.
One day all of Pandora will look like this.
Zentz brightened so much that Flattery forgave himself the lie. He turned to Nevi.
You saw the trap sprung topside?
Nevi nodded.
Looks like we burned about 300. Crews are out chasing down the wounded. So far, nobody big. As we suspected, their eagerness outstripped their readiness.
We cannot make that same mistake, Flattery warned. That is why you must bide your time with Crista Galli and the others. Her abduction must be turned to our advantage in every way possible. To take them now would be easy and foolish. Remember, from now on, she's only the bait, not the quarry.
A pair of white butterflies tumbled the air between them, and Zentz backed away. Flattery smiled.
They aren't dangerous, he said. Beautiful, don't you think? We've released these topside. They drink the weehi nectar. They have already multiplied the weehi 3-fold in and around the preserve. You know its value for defense, a natural booby trap. A problem, at times, with the livestock. The larvae of these beautiful creatures. Well, another time. I have 2 specific demands of your mission.
Flattery strolled to a plot of young trees, carefully planted in rows, in various stages of bloom and fruit production. Nearby, several hives of bees kept audibly busy. Nevi did not care for the bees, this Flattery well knew. He enjoyed Nevi's mastery of the neutral expression. He enjoyed Nevi's mastery of the neutral expression. He picked each man a fruit. "Golden transparent," he said, "a very hardy apple, earthside. Since I am developing a Garden of Eden of sorts, I thought them most appropriate." He indicated 2 carved stone benches under the largest of the trees and sat. Nevi was clearly impatient to be off on the chase, but Flattery could not let them go yet. Nor could he bear watching Zentz make a slobber of his magnificent fruit. "There are objectives more important than their capture," he emphasized. "Ozette must be discredited. He was popular on Holovision, and his disappearance has already been aired, thanks to Beatriz to Touche. This only firms our resolve to expose him as a monster. He must be seen as a madman in the clutches of madmen, with the deathly ill Crista as their slave. We will play on her beauty and her innocence. Leave that to me and to Holovision. That is the first thing I require of your mission."
And the second? Nevi asked.
Such a question was uncharacteristic of Nevi. How much he must want to be on with it. Flattery wondered what this enthusiasm would add to Nevi's performance. Crista will be a problem for them shortly, he said. They'll want her off their hands. We want her to be seen asking for our help. She must want the director to save her, and the people must know this. It is our only way of guaranteeing absolute control after this little action topside, our only way short of all-out extermination of these pocket villages and little Zavatan monasteries that are the breeding grounds for these shadows.
"Interesting," Nevi said. "This will require some care. Maybe it's a job for your propaganda people at Holovision. Have you found any drugs to be useful for her persuasion?"
"Details of her drug program are in the briefing you will receive in the foil," Flattery said. He glanced at his timepiece. "I will say that if she is eaten, she could be catatonic at any time. Instructions, precautions, and drugs have been prepared and are stowed with your briefing materials. Her persuasion is completely up to you. The manner of persuasion, too, is up to you." Nevi smiled one of his rare smiles. That was what Flattery liked about the man, if one could call such a creature a man. He rose to a challenge.
"The Tatouche woman, does she launch today with the drive system and your OMCs?"
"Yes," Flattery said, "as planned. Why do you ask?"
"I don't trust her," he said, and shrugged. "She'll be up there with current control, and we're going into the kelp."
"She will be no trouble," Flattery said. "She's been very helpful to us. Besides, she's my problem. Leave that to me." Zentz had finished gnashing down his apple and was once again gawking about the greens.
"Any of those Zavatans ever tunnel in here? They have hidey holes all over the high reaches."
"He still has his uses," Flattery reminded himself. "My pets love exploring," Flattery answered, indicating Archangel. "Did you know that 90% of their brain tissue is dedicated to their sense of smell? No one has tunneled in yet, and whoever does will face Archangel. Then we booby-trap the tunnel for the rest." Zentz nodded.
"A good arrangement,"
he gurgled. "You haven't tried your apple," Flattery said, nodding to the bright yellow fruit in Nevi's palm.
"I'm saving it," the assassin replied, "for Crista Gali."
"Do you know how hard it is to think like a plant?" Dwarf Macintosh, Kelp Master, current control. From Holovision Nightly News, 3 Jewels, 493. The Immensity, with a capital I, it's a proper name, prickled its long gray-green fronds and sniffed the current in its chemical way. The sniff did not detect a presence so much as the hint of a presence. It was more a presence than proper smell or taste, but the kelp knew that something of itself passed by now in the current. The Immensity was a convolution of kelp, a subtle interweave of vines that sprawled, like a muscular brain, throughout the sea. It had begun as a wild kelp, and ignored planting inside a long-abandoned merman outpost. And ignored planting inside a long-abandoned merman outpost. It had barely known self from other when it first encountered the avatological study team, led by Alyssa Marsh. Most of what the Immensity knew of humans it had learned from Alyssa Marsh. This stand of kelp knew slavery from the human memories that her DNA held, and it knew itself to be enslaved by current control. With the right tickle in its vines, it raised them, lowered them, retracted or extended them. Another electrical tickle set off the luciferase in the kelp, lighting the passage of human submarine trade. There were other tricks as well, all of which pulsed a current through a channel. Simple servility, simple stimulation response. This was reflex, not reflection. The Immensity had all of eternity at its disposal. It allowed this exercise because it pleased the humans and did not interfere with the stand's extended contemplations. Thanks to Alyssa Marsh and her shipmate, Dwarf Macintosh, the kelp had learned how to follow the electrical tickle to its source. Everything that humans transmitted now flowed straight to the heart of the Immensity. Everything. The Immensity was finally prepared to send something back. It was getting closer to a breakthrough to these humans, and that breakthrough would not be through touch or the chemical smell, but through light waves intersecting in air. Pleasing humans was a trivial matter, displeasing them was not. Once, soon after waking, this kelp had lashed out in pain to pluck a runaway submersible from among its vines. The huge cargo train had torn 100-meter swath nearly a kilometer long in its path through the vines. After the kelp slapped the deadly thing and plucked it apart, Flattery's slaves came with cutters and burners to amputate the kelp back to infancy. The Immensity knew that it had not been able to think right for some time after that, and it did not intend to give up its thinking ever again. A certain stirring now in the tips of its fronds told the Immensity that the One, the Holomaster, was passing. The Immensity could unite fragmented stands of kelp into one will, one being, one blend of physics that humans called soul. Deep in its genetic memory lay a void, an absence of being that could not be teased out of the genetics labs of the mermen. This void waited like a nest for the egg, the Holomaster who would teach the kelp how to unite fragmented stands of humans. Twice this Immensity gave up its body, but never its will. It was capable of neither sorrow nor regret, simply of thought and a kind of meditative presence that allowed it to live fully in the now, while Flattery's electrical strings at current control manipulated the puppet of its body. Reflex is a speedy response made without the brain's counsel. Reaction is a speedy response made with minimal counsel. This kelp grew up expecting to be left alone. It learned reaction only after its vines twined with domestic kelp. It learned to kill when threatened and to show no mercy. Then it learned to expect retaliation for killing. This Immensity expected to live forever. Logic dictated that it would not live forever if it continued reacting to humans. And now, the One was passing. It knew this as surely as the blind snapperfish knows the presence of a Murray. The original immensity of kelp, Avata, encompassed all of the seas of Pandora under one consciousness, one voice, one being. Its first genetic extinction came early in the formation of the planet. It had been at the mercy of a fungus. A burst of ultraviolet from a huge sunstorm killed off the fungus. Somewhere, a primitive frond lay mummified in a salt bog awaiting Pandora's first ocean. The second extinction was by human beings, by a human bioengineer named Jesus Lewis. The kelp was teased back to life by a few DNA miners about 50 years later. The revitalized kelp that the mermen resurrected was developed from these early experiments. Now, kelp once again filled the seas, dampening the murderous storms. Once again, the great stands scattered scent. They grew close with the years. Their fronds spoke the chemical tongue. This immensity itself retained 2.25 million cubic kilometers of ocean. The one rode a kelpway that skimmed the immensity's reach. This particular kelpway came out of a stand of blue kelp that had been known to attack its own kind, overpowering nearby stands, sucking out their beings and injecting its own. It had suffered many prunings, and was sorely in need of guidance. This the immensity knew from snatches of terror that drifted in on torn fronds. The one could not be trusted to such a dangerous stand. At whatever cost, the one must be spared. The kelp shifted itself slightly against the electrical strings from current control to bring the one into its outmost currents, spiraling into the safer deeps of its own stand. And with that, I have to call it good for the week. I have to run. So we're going to call it right there. We will continue next week. On Monday, we'll continue reading Full Metal Panic. Actually, we'll be starting Book 5 of Full Metal Panic. We'll continue reading through 40,000 in Gehenna by C.J. Cherry, and we will continue reading The Ascension Factor by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. I almost said Bill Herbert and Frank Ransom, and that would have been interesting.